Religion permeated almost every aspect of daily life in Mesopotamia. Uniform texts provide much information, but they also muddle the picture, as happened with the idea that the temple as an institution dominated the political, social, and economic landscape of the third millennium. I will not get into details about this temple state idea because I would want you to research it on your own. But in the next 10 minutes, I will focus on what archaeology can tell us about Mesopotamian religion during the third millennium. There are three different ways one can assess religion. One is religious belief, which gods and goddesses people worshipped. The second is the spaces where they were worshipped. And lastly, the religious practices that people performed to get closer to the gods, to express their religious beliefs. Just to refresh your memory a bit, the third millennium is divided into three main periods. The early dynastic period, when we have the crystallization of writing and city-states competing for access to resources. The Akkadian period, with the emergence of the First Empire and the introduction of the Akkadian language, and lastly, the Ur-3 period, with its ziggurats and the most bureaucratic state ever, which reintroduced the Sumerian language. So let's look now at how we can approach Mesopotamian religious beliefs. Mesopotamian religion was polytheistic. We know from texts that by the end of the third millennium, approximately 3,600 deities were worshipped. Some major deities appear more often in the visual and textual record, such as Enki, Shamos, Inanna, as you see on the famous ceiling of Ada, and deities were depicted in human form. And what distinguished them from mortals in the visual record was their horned headdress, which became the symbol of divine status from the early dynastic period onwards. Mesopotamian deities had human traits. They could be happy, angry, depressed, or aggressive. Some deities were linked to natural phenomena or associated with geographical features. Others were linked to aspects of human life, such as writing or childbirth. Most of the information we get from the visual record about how gods and goddesses looked like comes from the Akkadian period, but it is not always easy to identify them. Just to give you an idea of two of the major gods we are able to identify in the visual record, here is Inanna. She resided in Uruk and was the goddess of sex and war. Her attributes varied. On these images, you can see the weapons sprouting from her winged shoulders, indicating her warlike nature, or a lion, as on this cylinder seal. She was also often depicted in frontal face. Enki was one of the most powerful gods in Mesopotamia. He was the god of subterranean fresh waters and wisdom. As you can see in all the images here, he is depicted with streams of water flowing from his shoulders and sometimes in his abode. These gods resided in temples, thought to be their households. Each city had its own patron deity. The sky god An and his daughter Inanna were worshipped at Ur. Enki at Eridu, Sin, the moon god, at Ur, the temple of whom you see here in this wonderful picture. As you can see from these reconstructions of different temples and periods in the third millennium, temples dominated the urban landscape. Each city could house more than one god and have several temples dedicated to different deities. We have also evidence from the early second millennium that other lesser deities were worshipped at a more local level, in so-called neighborhood shrines or private chapels, as for example the Hendursak chapel at Ur, seen on the lower right-hand corner. So let's look now at some temples more closely. Enki's temple at Eridu provides us with the best preserved sequence of temples from the Ubaid down to the Ur-3 period. What is common in all these periods is, as you can see at the top picture, the existence of an altar and an offering table, key features of the Mesopotamian temple. By the early dynastic period, the temple had become a more complex space, with more than one altars and plenty of offering pedestals, quarters for priests, as well as structures that held the treasury and storerooms. We see here one example of such a multifunctional sacred space, the square temple at Tel Ashmar, which had 2 altars in 2 different rooms and 4 offering pedestals, as well as the priest's room. During the same period, we also see oval temples, so called because of the unusual oval contour of their outer walls. Such oval temples have been found at Lagash, Tel Alubayt, and at Kafaj. Let's look at the best preserved one at Kafaj. Its sacred area was set apart from the rest of the city by double enclosure walls, and the temple building, unfortunately, itself has not survived. The entire precinct area, though, was built on a foundation of clean sand, the quantity of which has been estimated at 98,000 tons. Imagine that 98,000 of such sandbags were needed. What an enormous expenditure of human resources. This temple also provides evidence for the presence of workshops and storerooms within the precinct area. In the Ur-3 period, we see what you must all know and have seen hundreds, if not thousands, of pictures of: the ziggurats, stepped temple towers that probably had 3 stories reached by stairs. Ziggurats have been found in both South and North Mesopotamia. In most of these pictures, we see the most famous ziggurat, that of Ur, dedicated to the moon god Sin, and on the top left-hand corner, the reconstruction of the Uruk ziggurat. As you can see in this plan, the ziggurat was surrounded by a complex system of walls, courts, and installations, such as big ovens. The holy district was separated from the rest of the city, and ziggurats dominated the cityscape. Let's move on now to our last section, how we can assess the expression of belief. For this, look briefly at rituals, festivals, and gifts given to the gods in the 3rd millennium in Mesopotamia. Religious rituals played an important role in maintaining the status quo and in retaining deities' favor. Some rituals were performed on a regular basis, while others as and when required. The most important daily religious rituals were associated with providing for the statues of the gods, imbued with the divine presence. We see here 2 plaques depicting food and drink offerings to the gods, as well as libations, and on top we have what we believe is a scene of a ram's sacrifice. Sometimes, when people requested the gods' favor, they brought to the temple exotic, expensive gifts, ranging from stone bowls or silver vases to symbolic weapons such as mace heads like the one here, but also the elite could place statues of themselves in the god's private chamber as a more direct means of supplication. The most famous example is the cache of 12 statuettes found buried in pits next to the altar of the square temple Tel Ashmar. Temples and shrines have thus been perceived as interactive ritual spaces, crowded with gifts and offering tables, like we see in this picture below. Another important aspect of Mesopotamian religious practice were collective open-air rituals and processions on the occasion of festivals. These were held to ensure the continuing goodwill of the gods at important also moments in the agricultural calendar. We know from cuneiform texts that such festivals were held, for example, at the city of Girsu, to honor Ningirsu, the patron deity, twice a year. We read that sacrificial activities took place along the sacred way to the temple prior to the entrance to the city and lasted for about 3 or 4 days. But we had never found any material remains related to such public rituals dating to the 3rd millennium. And now, in 2015, renewed excavations at the site unearthed part of a ceremonial pit at the large sacred plaza, exactly where the texts mention it to be. This yielded more than 300 cultic cups, bowls, and jars, but also fossil material, remains from animal sacrifices, and layers of ash, possibly from the great ritual fires held there. This amazing find is the first and earliest archaeological proof for such ritual festivals. So today, in less than 10 minutes, we have seen that the archaeological record can be very useful to get a deeper understanding of Mesopotamian religion. We saw how gods and goddesses looked like. We got acquainted with some ritual practices such as sacrifices and feeding ceremonies, learned more about how beliefs and practices shaped the religious space of temples, and became more accustomed with the praxis of dedicating gifts to the gods and celebrating in public. I would now like you to ponder the following question, and I will close with providing you with further reading. Thank you.